the wrong tune in the wrong key. Gig nightmares for you and me. Song changed keys and I wasn't ready. Gig nightmares for you and me. Another key change, oh God, oh no. Gig nightmares for you and me.
All right, Gig Nightmares. Here we are today with Mr. Mark Newman. Mark, how are you today?
Okay, how are you?
Doing very well. So it's a little bit over a year ago now that I saw you with the Hitmen, since my singer Gloria Carpenter was telling me for years, hey, you need to come out and see these guys. It's just people who have played with everyone, playing all the best hits of everyone. And it was just an amazing show. That was a Newton Theater. But yeah, since then, I mean, we got to chat a little bit after then, but, you know, just hearing all the different people you've played with, you know, John Oates from obviously Hall & Oates, Sam Moore, you know, sad to hear he passed, I think that was last month in January, sad.
Yeah.
But then just so many different people, Jim McCarty from, you know, the Yardbirds, Bobby Whitlock from Derek and the Dominoes, just like so much awesome stuff in your history.
Well, yeah, I mean, I got lucky. That's it. Yeah, I mean, you know how that works. It's basically somebody gets fired or they quit or and you happen to have a friend that's playing drums in that band. So, you know, the person doesn't want to go, the artist doesn't want to go through a ton of auditions. So they ask everybody in the band, hey, you know somebody that, you know, can do the gig? And of course your friends recommend you, and you just better be good enough to hang on to the gig. And that's pretty much how it works. At least that's in my experience.
Sure. And I mean, having those interpersonal connections is part of the biggest thing, because I mean, there very well could be, you know, whatever position you're in, there very well could be someone, you know, who may be a better musical fit or whatever, or may, you know, might be able to play a million notes per hour, but like if they're not a good hang, you know, what's the point?
Right. Yeah, and most artists don't want those people who can play a million notes per hour, you know?
Exactly.
They'll see you do that. They'll go, wow, this guy's great. And then when you get to the gig, you got to play the gig.
Yeah.
You know, you can't use it as a jumping off point just to, you know, go to Notes Anonymous afterwards. So...
Yep. So, given the topic of the show, Gig Nightmares, I'm curious to hear what stories you have from, you know, your years of doing this thing.
Well, luckily, I haven't had that many nightmares, and I don't think I had any nightmares with the people you just mentioned. They were all really great people, paid on time, and the tours were usually, you know, nice hotels and everything. So it really... I think as far as I toured with Willy DeVille, like for like sometimes it would be a month or 6 weeks. And, you know, we would do sound check, and then we'd walk around the town wherever we were. And, you know, you had to have you know, they gave you badges when you got to the venue. And I walked to the front door, and there's two guys that are about 9 feet tall, and they're trying to charge me to get in. And I said, I'm with the band. And he's going, where's your badge? And of course, you know, I couldn't resist the, we don't need no stinking badges from, you know, Treasure right. Sierra Madre.
Yep.
Didn't go over well. And I must have been at the door for like 20 minutes. And finally I said, listen, if you don't let me in, the band's not going to go on. And it finally somebody made the decision to let me get backstage. So I was surprised they even believed me at that point. So that was the only incident with, you know, any of the people you mentioned. Well, you didn't mention Willie, but he was one of my favorite artists to play with. He was huge in Europe, not so much in the States after a while. I had nightmares with the most recent one. I got asked to sit in at the Asheville Guitar Bar, you know, in North Carolina.
Sure.
So I went down there, and my luck, it was the weekend that hurricane hit.
Oh.
Hurricane Helene.
Yeah.
The Asheville Guitar Bar was underwater because it was right on the riverbank. So, and they were never prepared for a storm like that. So obviously I didn't get to sit in. So some of the other things were I got asked to play a festival upstate. I don't even remember the name of the festival. And it seemed a little odd that they would contact me out of the blue. So I said, you know, listen, I support what I do as a band, but I also do it solo. Is it okay if I do this one solo? Because I was a little leery. And it was like about 4 hours away from my house. Excuse me. So I took the drive. I got up there. They were still building the stage.
Oh.
And you know, just finishing it up and then putting the speakers in place and then starting to test the PA. I think I was supposed to go on at like, I don't know, 2 or 3. I waited around until maybe 5 o'clock, and then I did my set really quickly, got in my car and drove home. And there were hardly any people there. It was, I couldn't understand why they would even, it's as if they didn't want anyone to know about this festival. And they never did it again, to my knowledge. Let's see, another nightmare story. I got asked to play Oyster Fest on Long Island. And it's a great festival. There's like, you know, a few stages around the town. And we got asked to play maybe, you know, one of the 2 main stages. So they always tell you this back line. And of course, you know, we're just doing a quick line check. And my guitar amp wasn't working, you know, the one they provided. So I grabbed the rhythm guitar player's amp. Halfway through the set, that amp wasn't working. So I kicked the first amp, and all of a sudden it was working. I finished the set through that amp. And there was just one guitar instead of 2. So, and that's happened a couple of times in my life where, you know, there's backline and it's a nightmare. I was in, you want me to keep rambling like this? Or
Sure, go ahead.
I got a bunch of them. And again, wasn't with any of the famous people. Well, this one, a good friend of mine named Dave Keys, who's an amazing piano player. He plays stride piano. He got asked to do a tour in China, and it was around like 2.5 or 3 weeks. We went to 9 different cities. So every city we went to, we were playing in like the Chinese opera houses, and they were, you know, 1,000 to 1,500 capacity. And they all had their own backline. They all had amps there, or they got them from a local place. And I would say out of the 9 gigs, I think there were 2 gigs where I could plug into the amp and go, oh, that sounds good. Just about every amp was a nightmare. It seemed like they had a lot of interns working at all these places, and they were all trying to help me. And there's 3 guys that don't speak English, and I don't speak Chinese. And they're like turning all the knobs. And we had an interpreter with us, and I had to ask him, please tell them to go away. They're making it worse. And finally, I mean, I was furious. There's feedback everywhere. And some of these stages really weren't meant to have electric instruments on them. I think they were built, you know, as I said, a Chinese opera house for like live sound to come off the stage, kind of like Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
I said something horrible, like by the 5th time I asked the interpreter, I said, tell them I'm going to kill them and their families if they don't walk away from those amps. So, and then, you know, I'm trying to pull the words back in my mouth because I realize I'm being a dick. But this was, you know, after like a half hour of these guys just messing with the amps and just making it worse. And this happened, like I said, this happened probably at least six or 7 of the 9 gigs.
Mm.
So yeah, when they booked a tour, I guess it was a matter of courtesy, but they said, what kind of amp do you want? And I said, get me a deluxe reverb or anything that's got the fewest amount of knobs on it. And of course, most of the places, there were Marshalls, with blown speakers and 2 rows of knobs that I'm looking at them going, what do I do now? So I'm kind of a low-tech kind of guy. So, and, you know, deluxe reverb, pretty much what I use all the time. So then there was another time I was on tour with a woman that she had a career in the Christian market, and she had a pop hit out in the 90s, maybe 2 of them. And so she was doing, you know, mostly secular tours, and they hired my band to back her up. So occasionally there would be like a Christian festival in between the other ones. So, you know, we would play those, and they were all flight dates. One of my Strats was missing. And the tour manager freaked out. He said, of all the places for somebody to steal one of your Strats, a Christian, you know, a Christian concert. It turned up. One of the roadies forgot to take it out of the van, but it took like just as we finished Soundcheck for that other Strat to show up. That was my backup Strat. Let's see. Another time I was doing a gig in Memphis, and I'm flying back to LaGuardia, and at that time I was mostly playing a 335, and there was no way they were going to let me on the plane with the 335. So, which was another nightmare my whole life. You know, they want to take your guitar away from you and put it in baggage.
Yeah.
So you better have letters from the Musicians Union and all this other stuff just to back up your case. So I get off the plane, I go to pick up my bag, and my 335 is not there. It wound up going on the next flight. I had to go back to LaGuardia the next day to pick it up. So I was furious, you know, because that's a vintage guitar. And, you know, the guys that, you know, nothing against the guys that handle baggage. I'm sure they're all great guys, but they're not always careful.
No.
We were looking out the window when we were on tour, and I think we were in Pittsburgh changing planes, and we saw the keyboard player's rig on a forklift. The guy must have turned too fast, and the whole road case went flying off the forklift. And now all his gear was in pieces on the runway. So
that's sad.
most of it worked when we got to the gig, but he had to like repatch everything. It took him forever. Let's see, another nightmare scenario. You're not an island guy, so you probably haven't played the Memory Motel in Montauk. So have you heard of it?
I can't say I have now.
Well, the reason it's somewhat famous, the Stones have a song called Memory Motel. Before one of their tours, they allegedly used that place to rehearse. And then they wrote the song, the Memory Motel.
That's cool.
Yeah. So a lot of New York, like a lot of bands from the city would go out there in the summer and play. And, you know, the money was never good. But, you know, I was one of those bands, and we were there pretty, you know, regular basis. There was never a gig where there weren't eyeballs and teeth at the end of the night, you know, on the floor. By about 2 a.m., there'd be a fist fight. And, you know, beer mugs being smashed over people's heads. And it never failed. There would always be some guy who was, I'm sure you've been through this, some guy who was like just shit-faced. And they want to sit in and they want to play your guitar or your bass or whatever. I'm squaring off on a break with a guy who's like over 6 feet tall, and he's trashed, and he wants to play bass. And he had seen my band there before, and I'm grateful that he was a fan, but he's trying to poke me in the chest, and I kept smacking his hand away and just, you know, just staring at him in case he moved in. And luckily, the guy didn't try to jump on me. But this went on for about the whole break, like about 20 minutes. And he finally gave up. I guess he got frustrated. There was a bouncer that worked at the Memory Motel who was really jacked. And he came in for a beer on his night off. And this guy, for some reason, just walked over to the bouncer and started shoving him. And the bouncer just knocked him out cold. And we saw things like that a lot, you know, at that place. None of these are really horrible, but
it's still like the experiences that, you know, plenty of musicians go through. Like, well, you mentioned like fly gigs. Well, right now it's February. Next month I'm going to be doing my first, fly gigs. I'm going on a short 1 week European tour with a metal band. So I'm trying
nice.
I've been trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to like, pack all my stuff. And I'm kind of leaning right now towards just having like a big backpack, having like my small Line 6 small pedal board in there, and then taking the neck off of my guitar and just putting that in the bag so I don't have to worry about it getting lost by, the airline company or TSA or whatever. Because I know a bunch of country players do that.
I know. I read about that. I'm not good enough at that sort of thing to I've replaced necks on my guitar, but I don't know. I hate to do it. I've gotten my guitar on every European flight. I've gotten my guitar on in a gig bag because they're generally big planes. So the 777s have shorter overheads. So if you're using a Strat or a Tele, you'll just make it. If you have anything bigger than that, you won't get it in the overhead. But usually I've gotten my guitar on going to Europe and Japan too. Yeah, I've never had a problem overseas. Most of it's in the States.
Interesting.
I mean, if you take that route, you might be cursing me out if they, if they take your guitar. But generally, that's been my experience. And I've done a lot of overseas gigs. And it's rarely a problem. So, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of any other nightmare scenarios.
But it's also just fun, like doing this show and having these conversations, because like you'll say something and then I'll remember something, and like I know it's happened with like a few people who have listened to the show also. But like you mentioned, like sort of like the interns at the Chinese opera houses running sound and just kind of screwing it up. 80s Revolution, we played like a university sort of gig a while ago, where I guess with how they had like some like the monitors and something else daisy chained, for some reason pretty much like the first 2 or 3 songs we're playing, there's just no guitar and no keyboards coming out of anywhere. They had to like, I have no idea. I've never seen anything like that before, but somehow that they had the monitors daisy chained, they had to like unplug one thing and then, oh, now it works. But it's like, that doesn't, it's just weird stuff like that. But then again, it was all like interns running the place for some reason, but because it's a college.
Yeah, that's always a problem. I mean, there are some, my nephew was an intern at some of the clubs on Long Island and in New York. And luckily he's pretty savvy with this stuff, but he was telling me, actually the people that hired him, I know some of those people, and, they were telling me, yeah, he's done a good job. You wouldn't believe what we get as far as interns. They weren't paying attention in school. So, the band you saw me with, the Hitmen.
Yes.
We were doing a few gigs in Florida, and the monitors are always an issue with that band because 2 of the guys use in-ears. The sound checks just take forever because of that. Because they want certain things in their ears, and then they also have a monitor as a backup. So for me, it's just like, give me kick, snare, and hi-hat from the drummer and the vocals, and I'm good. But, with the in-ears, it's a little trickier. So there was one gig where the sound crew couldn't get the monitors working. And the sound check, and I'm not kidding, the sound check was 6 hours.
Oh, no.
The gig is only an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So the drummer was losing his mind, especially his band. And, there's a few songs that we play the tracks just because the song is so involved. So we do have, some extra instruments in the tracks. Mm-hmm. So without the monitors, we can't do that. The leader is backstage in a frenzy going, okay, what song do you know by, because we had the whole gimmick with that band is that the repertoire is whoever any one of us played with.
Yeah.
So we had to replace all the songs that had tracks, which maybe maybe 4 songs. And and this was like, this conversation was 10 minutes before we hit the stage.
Oh no.
Yeah, because again, the monitors weren't working, and that was the worst one. But there have been others where the monitor guy just did not have their shit together, and they it just took forever. Or, you know, you ask for something in the monitors and like, can you give me a little more upper mids in the monitor so it cuts through? And the first thing out of the guy's mouth is, hey, you know, you don't want to piss me off, you know, because and sorry, I asked you for a little more, you know, upper mids. Did I say something to offend you? So with those gigs, the monitors are the biggest issue.
When Gloria listens to this and she hears what you just said, she's going to have one person in mind.
Oh, a sound guy?
But yeah.
You guys travel with your own sound guy, or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends, because like sometimes, like, you know, the theaters tend to be union, the casinos are usually union, but then like a lot of like the club dates, you know, you bring your own sound guy.
Right. Well, with us, we had the gig you saw, we probably had our own guy. But the monitor guys are always they're always the house guys. The sound guy was also like, you know, kind of the tour manager. There was one gig where I guess volume was an issue, and like the stage was a very live stage, and we had a different sound guy that night. He didn't put any of the instruments through the house. Oh. And we had no idea because it sounded great on the stage. And one of my friends that lives in the area said, you know, the mix really sucked. And I said, why? And he said, you were taking a guitar solo and you couldn't hear it.
That sucks.
I know. And they mic everything with this band. And some of the other guitar player goes direct out of there's 2 of them. They're amp.
Like the amp modelers.
Yeah, they're amp modelers, and they're real high-end ones. Kemper.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's another one that starts with an F.
Fractal?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the other guitar player uses one of them, they take his sound off of that, but he still has a speaker bottom on the stage.
Sure.
But they didn't have any of the instruments in the house. So the whole mix was just awful. So again, with that band, it's usually, you know, the sound checks being, you know, taking forever. Even when I worked with John Oates, he would want, all of a sudden he'd get an idea, like he'd want different background vocals, or he'd say, okay, instead of doing that, why don't you do and I had to play slide on this one song, and he says, why don't you do a D9 chord through the whole song? I think that'll really drive it. Yeah, but that's not on the record. And not that I care, but now I can't play in open tuning. I had to do the slide solo in standard tuning, which wasn't that big a deal. I'm used to doing it, but I want, you know, it's always swampier when you have open tuning.
Sure.
So, and those sound checks would go on for like 2 to 3 hours, because he'd want to rehearse things that, you know, he wanted to change. So, you know, other than that, I can't think of too many other, you know, nightmare stories. Again, I've been lucky. I mean, as far as like corporate gigs or having to play a wedding, when I started doing those, there were nights where we played in Brooklyn, and I would swear they were like going to send us home in cement shoes, or maybe not send us home, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, some of these guys were like Teamsters, and you didn't know if you were going to get out alive. And I mean that literally. You know, some of the maitre d's would pack guns.
Ugh.
Yeah. I think I met Gloria in one of those scenarios.
Yeah, she was the first episode of the podcast, and she had a lot of fun stories from, like, whether it was corporate gigs or just like the private functions like that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. She worked with a guy that, in my opinion, was the antichrist of that world.
Oh.
And they called me for a gig, and I'm thinking, should I take the gig? And then I found out Gloria was on it, and I'm, yeah, great. I haven't seen Gloria in ages. And the leader calls Every Breath You Take.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm ready to play it like the record. He does this corny swing version that apparently somebody in the 50s or 60s did a real cornball. Well, no, I'm sorry. The song came out in the 80s. I'm wrong about that. But this guy who was from that other era, it was like, every breath you take.
Oh, was it Paul Anka? I remember he has like a rock swings album or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was Jack Jones, actually.
Oh, okay.
I think. And Gloria said to me on the break, she said, I've known you for X amount of years. I've never seen that expression on your face. I didn't know what to do on that. I just laid out. I was like, they called me quite a few times and I didn't take the gigs for other reasons. But, then I realized I was being a moron. The money was good. Just take the gig and take the money and go home and shut up.
Yep.
So, but I had worked for some very nasty leaders over the years, and that guy being one of them. And I found myself in a position when I first started doing those sort of gigs. I had a 1-year-old and I had to work. And I had come out of a world where I was playing with, I lived in LA before that, and I was playing with people who, had careers and doing concerts and then, doing local things in LA. But I was pretty much just playing rock or blues or, I had studied music, so I knew, I could play a jazz gig, but I really wasn't doing many of those. And when I got to New York and I had to start doing those gigs to make money, I must have told quite a few leaders, if you talk to me like that again, you're going to have two choices. I'm going to leave, or you're going to be missing some teeth. So I got blackballed from Stephen Scott because of one of those episodes for quite a while, actually. And I got blackballed from another office too. There was just no reason to speak to anybody like that.
Sure.
And some of these guys, again, they were like would-be Teamsters, and like I was tuning my guitar, and the guy started screaming at me, "I told you to play!" God damn! I was on a break, and I think that was the first guy I said that to. Again, I'm not a tough guy at all, but there's just no reason to speak to somebody like that. Somebody's calling me from California. I'm doing a tour in April, and they're driving me crazy about the flights. I'm playing with this band, a band from the 60s called the Blues Project, which was Al Cooper's first band, and they're trying to resurrect it. And there's only one guy left from the original lineup, which is pretty common these days.
Yeah.
And the guy's great, but he's trying to, they're trying to resurrect it and do a tour, and they had a new album out. So, and the music's fun, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah, so it's interesting you to bring that up. I was going to ask your opinion on something. When I saw you last year, you had Greg Smith playing bass for you, but then I think he went to go join the Guess Who. And I saw that, I'm thinking, oh, that's a pretty cool gig. But then something like maybe a few weeks later, they were supposed to be doing a run of shows down in like maybe Florida. And right as they get down there, I see a big post saying that more or less they're getting like, they're sued. They're getting like a cease and desist saying, hey, you can't use the Guess Who name anymore. I think Burton Cummings and was it Randy Bachman? I think they did like a joint thing sending a cease and desist with that.
Yeah, well, what they did was I forget if they were BMI or ASCAP, but they pulled all their material from whatever rights organization. This is what was told to me by Greg. They pulled all their music off of, the rights organization. And then now the current lineup of the Guess Who couldn't do it. And apparently Burton Cummings was bitter because he was trying to have a solo career. That's why he left the Guess Who. And the Guess Who were still touring, and he really wasn't doing anything. And now I think he reinstated all the music with the Rights Corporation, the Rights Group, and I think he's touring now. But I could be mistaken. But either way, Greg lost the gig, and he left the Hitmen to go do that gig. It was more lucrative. They had more work. And I would have done the same thing. So he really took a beating financially from that one, as far as I know.
I know a lot of people do have like complaints saying, oh, it's only one original member, but it's like, it's more than just that. One, from like an artistic standpoint, it's like, well, you're keeping the music alive, because like if you're not doing it, who's going to be doing it? Who's going to be playing like even if you have like a cover band playing like certain songs and whatever, you're not going to be playing like the more, I guess, deeper catalog of the Guess Who for the most part. So it's really only like that touring entity of the Guess Who that's probably ever going to be playing those songs, keeping that music alive. But probably more important than that, I mean, it's the music industry business. It's all these, all the different people like who rely on that for like a, income, whether it's
Sure.
like the people working the venue or the crew, the merch, everything like that. And I think that's something that a lot of people fail to think about.
I know, and unfortunately, as far as I know, the people that are making money are all the bands from way back. Like they've had careers, but there's still a demand for their music, even if the music's like 50 or 60 years old. That demographic has the money to spend to go out and see concerts. Kids don't necessarily have that kind of money.
Sure.
And ticket prices are really expensive. So, I don't know. I mean, the Blues Project they had a cult following for sure. It was Al Cooper's first band, and then Al Cooper left with Steve Katz and started Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Yeah, and then I think Al Cooper got pushed out of the band after the first album. And then Steve Katz started touring with the Blues Project again. I got the call because I opened up for the Blues Project, and I hit it off with the drummer, who's the last remaining original guy. Steve Katz left the band. He didn't want to tour. So the drummer called me and asked me if I'd like to do the tour. Absolutely. The music was great, and the new lineup they had was really great. So I was flattered they asked me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was a lot, and they're great guys. I've been really lucky because all the names you mentioned, they were all great guys. They were never nasty. I mean, I've heard nightmare stories from friends of mine that have been on tour with other artists that they would never do it again. One of my friends was touring Europe. I won't mention the artist's name. The artist wanted his guitar in everybody's monitor on 11. and the drummer said, yeah, he's saying, listen, I don't need your guitar that loud in the monitor. I can hear it. And the guy also played really loud on stage. Like, you couldn't miss his guitar. And finally, the drummer left the tour. He just said, I'm out of here. And he left. And he went back to the States.
I mean, if it's that loud, you're going to eventually start losing hearing. So, yeah, why would you want to put up with that?
Right. Yeah, I did have a nightmare situation like that where I kind of did the same thing to somebody. I was backing somebody up, and we're on tour in Florida, and they were using a rhythm section. Like, this guy would use local rhythm sections, kind of like Chuck Berry used to do.
Oh, cool.
Which is another nightmare story, which I'll get to in a second. So they got this really young guy to play drums, and the guy was kind of green, and all the other guys in the band were older. They were like 40s, 50s, and they were all great players, but the drummer was rushing through the whole gig, and he's doing fills, and it was a guy, they needed that fat back kind of drummer.
Mm-hmm.
So I walked over to him. I kept running back to the drummer saying, do me a favor, don't do so many fills. You're going to throw the artist off. Oh, yeah, no problem, man. Just all over the place. So I ran over to the monitor guy, and I said, I want you to put my guitar in his monitor as loud as that knob will go. And the guy tried to start a fight with me after the gig. He said, man, you really like your guitar really loud. I said, I only do that when that's necessary. Well, what do you mean? It just got ugly for a second. And then he kind of, let it go. I got called, the same artist was opening up for Chuck Berry. And the other guitar player that was supposed to play with this, it was Sam the Sham. And the other guitar player that was supposed to play with Chuck Berry and play bass with him, and he bailed on the gig the night before. And Chuck Berry, well, first of all, I had no monitor. Now I had to play bass. It was in the contract that Sam's band was going to have to back Chuck Berry up. So now, you know, I love Chuck Berry. I couldn't hear what key he was in because there was so much reverberation. We were playing in a gym. No monitor, at least for me. He would just start playing. So there was no count off. There was no, hey, we're in B flat, you know. I had to like kind of creep up to the front of the stage just to, you know, catch the reverberation so I could get an idea what key he was in and hope for the best. So he turned to me. He has this one song, Reelin' and Rockin', and he wanted me to just go dun 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 on the bass. And I made the mistake of catching, like the drummer did in Anticipation, and I did it with him once. He stopped singing, turned around and started screaming at me. I told you to play this, and that's all I want. And he's yelling at me. I mean, you would think he would have kept singing and come over to me after the song and say, you know, listen, I just need you to do this, and I, you know, no problem. And he's one of the people actually said, when he started screaming at me, I went, you aren't paying me enough to put up with this bullshit. And I just turned my back on him, you know, and kept playing whatever I wanted. At that point, I figured he'd never call me again anyway. And I heard the same story from a lot of people that worked with him.
Wow.
And I love Chuck Berry. I mean, you know, he's one of the three kings of rock and roll: Elvis, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard.
Sure.
So, and I was warned, you know, beforehand. But I was kind of, you know, thrown in there at the last minute. And I was really young at the time too. And, you know, he was probably right and I was wrong. But, you know, I was in my 20s and a different guy back then.
Man, that's awesome though.
Yeah, I mean, you know, working with a lot of these guys, I got to meet, you know, other people. Like I got to meet Jerry Lewis, I'm an idiot. Who am I talking? Jerry Lee Lewis. I wasn't that far off. Although Jerry Lewis had better jokes. I got to meet Jerry Lee Lewis. I got to meet Rufus Thomas. I got to play with the Memphis Horns twice. This isn't a nightmare. Well, for me it was. We're doing a benefit at Elvis Presley's. There was a restaurant, like a venue in Memphis, downtown. It was called Elvis Presley's. So we're doing a benefit. Sam the Sham is on the bill. Now, I would always go up with the pickup band, and, you know, they play the intro to Wooly Bully, and then Sam would come up. So when we get to the dressing room, there's some older horn players in the dressing room, and Sam says, it was almost like he was setting me up. He said, tell the horn players where you want them to play, you know, where to come in, and, just give them some ideas. I said, yeah, okay, no problem. So I'm talking to these guys, and I get on the stage, and I start right before I start the band, the MC said, I want to thank this great horn section for backing everybody up tonight. Andrew Love from the Memphis Horns, and I'm horrified now. Ben Cowley from Otis Redding's band, and I'm going, oh my God.
Oh, no.
I get backstage after the show, and I looked at Andrew, and I said, I'm sorry. I said, how does it feel taking this shit from some white Jewish guy from Long Island? And he burst out laughing, luckily. I went back the next year to do the same benefit. I walk into the green room, and Andrew sees me, and he yells, hey, my man, what do you want me to play? Oh, fuck you, Andrew. It was really humiliating. I mean, and he was a good sport. So, I mean, these are the guys that invented that whole genre. So I'm telling them to do what they already do. That was a nightmare for me. I'm sure Andrew got a good laugh at it. I think Sam got a good laugh at it. I think he set me up. So anyway, those are my nightmare stories.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap things up, is there anything you want to be promoting? I mean, obviously you have Empirical Truth out.
Yeah, I've got a new CD coming out probably in the spring.
Oh, awesome.
It's probably going to be called At the Border, but I'm not sure yet. I haven't decided on a title. Um, I'm playing this Friday at a place called Swing the Teapot in Floral Park on Long Island with my original project. A couple of guys in my original project, and I have a Little Feat tribute band, and we're playing in a place called 118 North, which is near Philly.
Oh, in Wayne. Yeah, I've been there before.
Yeah, we're playing there on March 6th. And normally I swore I'd never be in a tribute band, but I'm having so much fun playing Little Feat stuff. Yeah, it's probably my favorite band ever.
Nice. I've never seen a tribute to Little Feat before. That's a cool idea.
Unfortunately, they didn't have a lot of radio airplay compared to other bands from that era. But I thought they were one of the best bands to come out of Southern California. You know, and they came out like right after all these like Eagles type bands and metal bands came out of LA. Like first, you know, like early 70s, there were the Eagles and all these kind of soft rock bands like country rock. And then there were a lot of metal bands coming out of LA and punk bands. And then Little Feat came along. Actually, they were out in the early 70s.
Yeah.
But I think they became more popular in the late 70s. But it was my favorite band. And we're doing Havana in New Hope on June 27. And let's see. I'm sure I'll be playing the Bitter End in the spring with my original project. I play there, you know, a few times a year. So anyway, that's my shameless promotion. And can't think of anything else at the moment.
Oh, awesome. All good stuff. Well, Mark, thank you for taking the time to chat and be a guest on Gig Nightmares. I've appreciated all the stories.
Hey, thanks for having me, and say hi to Gloria for me.
Will do. I'll talk to you soon, all right?
Take care.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Gig Nightmares. Gig Nightmares is an independently produced podcast made possible by the support of listeners like you. If you enjoyed this week's episode, we would appreciate if you left a rating and a review for us. Gig Nightmares.